Balrogs were ancient beings of fire, originally Maiar seduced to evil by Morgoth. They shrouded themselves in shadow and flame, fought in his wars, and spread fear and destruction across Middle-earth. After the War of Wrath, one of Morgoth's Balrog fled into the depths of the Misty Mountains, where it slept for thousands of years until the Dwarves of Moria accidentally awakened it, bringing doom upon their once great kingdom. After driving out the dwarfs, the Balrog became the Lord of Moria, ruling it with fire and terror until the day the Fellowship of the Ring, led by Gandalf, came in their quest to destroy the One Ring. In this video, we take a look at the full story of the Balrog that brought ruin to the Dwarven kingdom of Khazad-dûm and later became known as Durin's Bane during the Third Age of Middle-earth. Durin's Bane was one of the Balrogs, demons of terror whose true name was Valorca, meaning demons of power. Balrogs were originally Maiar, divine beings who served the Vala as their helpers. They possessed hearts of fire but were robed in darkness, and wherever they went, they spread dread and horror. After Sauron, they were among Morgoth's most fearsome servants, and it was not uncommon for them to ride into battle on the backs of dragons. In the days of Morgoth's rise, they were lured by his splendor and remained loyal to him even in his downfall. At every uprising of the Dark Lord and in every one of his battles, Balrog stood among his foremost warriors and commanders. No record survived describing the specific deeds of Durin's Bane in the First Age of Middle-earth, but it is assumed that it took part in all major battles and events in which the Balrogs appeared. When Morgoth carved deep into the earth the great fortress of Utumno, he began gathering to himself the Balrogs who had joined him in the early days of his rise and who became his most faithful servants. When the elves, firstborn children of Ilúvatar, awoke in Middle-earth, the Vala resolved to reclaim dominion over Arda, much of which Morgoth had occupied, so that they could free the elves from his shadow and corrupting influence. The Vala attacked Morgoth and his armies in the Battle of the Powers, during which they besieged Utumno. After a long and arduous struggle, the fortress was taken, Morgoth was captured, and his stronghold destroyed. The Balrogs escaped westward and hid in the dark depths of Angband, where they waited patiently for their master's return, as Morgoth was now imprisoned in Valinor. Many years later, when Morgoth and the spider demon Ungoliant destroyed the two trees, Telperion and Lorlin, and fled Valinor with the Silmarils, the Balrogs still lurked in Angband. Their moment of return came when they heard the cry of their master, who had been ensnared by Ungoliant's webs as she sought to devour the stolen Silmarils. The Balrogs rushed forth, swept over Hithlum, and stormed into Lammoth like a storm of fire. With their flaming whips they slashed apart Ungoliant's webs, and she fled in terror. In the First Age, before the sun began its journey across the sky, the battle known as Dagon Uin Gileath, the Battle Under the Stars, took place, in which the Noldor triumphed over Morgoth's orcs. Victorious, Fëanor, son of Finwë and creator of the legendary Silmarils, led a small vanguard of his loyal followers far into enemy territory, chasing the remnants of the orc army retreating toward Angband. Driven by vengeance, they reached the very gates of that dark citadel. Encouraged by its nearness and their master's presence, the orcs turned to make a desperate final stand. Morgoth, watching from the shadows of his fortress, sent out his most fearsome servants, the Balrogs. At their head was their lord, Gothmog, a dreaded warrior whose might and cruelty were known throughout Beleriand. The Balrogs charged with fiery fury. Their blazing whips cracked the air, their towering shadows sowed terror even among the bravest of elves, and the flames of their bodies lit the battlefield. Fëanor, driven by wrath and unbroken will, fought with immense courage and endurance, but though he withstood many blows, he ultimately fell to Gothmog's overwhelming might and was mortally wounded. At the last moment, Fëanor's sons arrived with their host, drove off the Balrogs, reclaimed their father's body, and forced the enemy back into the darkness of Angband. Carried on a litter by his sons, Fëanor used his final breath to warn them of Morgoth's strength before dying. His flame-filled spirit consumed his body, which turned to ash and was scattered by the wind. After his death, the eldest son, Midrose, sought to fulfill his father's oath and proposed a false truce with Morgoth, hoping to reclaim the Silmarils. Morgoth, master of deceit, pretended to accept but instead sent Balrogs who ambushed the elves, slew Midrosa's company, and captured him. He was chained to the cliff of Thangorodrim and left in torment until his friend Fingon later rescued him, though Midrose lost his right hand in the process. Balrogs reappeared during Dagor Bragollach, the Battle of the Sudden Flame, over 400 years after Fëanor's death. Alongside the Dragon Glorung and Orc armies, they caused devastating losses to elves and men. According to some accounts, Morgoth's chief lieutenant Sauron led a host of Balrogs to seize the elven island fortress of Tol Suran after this battle, securing yet another victory. In Ner Neith Arnediad, the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, Balrogs again took the field. Gothmog led one of Morgoth's armies to decisive confrontation. After defeating Maedhrosa's forces, he turned against the armies of Fingon and Turgon. In that brutal struggle he slew Hurin and Turgon, and with the aid of another Balrogs, Lungorfin, killed Fingon, sealing the doom of the battle and granting Morgoth final victory. Hurin, last of the defenders, was captured and brought to Angband, where Morgoth sought through torment to learn the location of Gondolin, but Hurin resisted despite the horrific tortures. In the year 510 of the First Age, during the fall of Gondolin, Balrogs attacked the hidden city alongside dragons, who broke through its walls and spread devastation. In a desperate duel, Ecthelion of the Fountain fought Gothmog and slew him, though he too died. As Tuatha, Idril, and their young son Eärendil fled the burning city, Glorfindel and his companions were confronted by another Balrogs in a mountain pass. In an epic struggle, Glorfindel cast the Balrogs into the abyss but fell to his own death as well. After Morgoth's defeat in the War of Wrath, the surviving Balrogs scattered and hid throughout Middle-earth. One of them, later known as Durin's Bane, settled deep beneath the Misty Mountains within the Dwarven kingdom of Khazad-dûm. For more than 5,000 years, the Balrog lay dormant in its subterranean refuge, hidden deep beneath the roots of the Misty Mountains. This lasted throughout the entire Second Age and most of the Third. Then, in the year 1980 of the Third Age, the Dwarfs of Khazad-dûm, driven by their unquenchable desire for mithril, the precious metal of incredible lightness, strength, and beauty, dug too deeply. Unknowingly, they awakened the ancient terror. Morgoth's Balrog rose from its long slumber and in a merciless confrontation slew King Durin VI. From that moment on, it became known as Durin's Bane. Some speculate that the Balrog had already been stirring, as Sauron's rising power awakened all evil creatures. The dwarfs may simply have freed it from its prison. After Durin's death, his son, King Narin I, tried to rally his people to stand against the demon and reclaim their home. Despite their bravery, the power of Durin's Bane was overwhelming. In 1981, Narin I and the surviving dwarfs were forced to abandon Khazad-dûm, leaving their ancient halls to darkness. The once great city fell into ruin and oblivion, gaining a new Sindarin name, Moria, the Black Pit. After the dwarfs' departure, Moria became a desolate place, and for 500 years the Balrog remained its only master. Orcs and other foul creatures eventually crept into the empty halls, building lairs in its labyrinthine tunnels. The Balrog tolerated them, though they lived in constant fear of the ancient terror. In 2480 of the Third Age, Sauron began sending orcs and trolls into the Misty Mountains to occupy key passes and expand his influence. These forces took control of Moria and dwelt there alongside the Balrog, though they feared it deeply. 3 centuries later, in 2799, the dwarfs fought a bloody war against the orcs, culminating in the Battle of Azanul-Bizar before Moria's gates. Though the dwarfs were victorious, they dared not enter Moria. Dane Ironfoot, famed warrior who slew the orc chief Azog, felt the presence of the ancient horror and wisely warned against attempting to reclaim it. Despite this warning, in 2989 Balin led an expedition to reoccupy Moria. At first the mission seemed successful, and the dwarfs revived life in the ancient halls. But the dream was short-lived. The Balrog, together with the orcs, destroyed the entire colony, killed Balin, and ended all hope of restoring lost dwarven glory in Khazad-dûm. The true nature of Durin's Bane was unknown to most of Middle-earth. Only the wise recognized it as a Balrog of Morgoth. This ignorance fueled superstition and fear, deterring many from venturing into the depths of Moria. On January 12, 3019 of the Third Age, the Fellowship of the Ring, after failing to cross the snow-buried pass of Caradhras, resolved that the only viable route lay through the dark halls of abandoned Moria. The vast chambers of ancient Khazad-dûm, once alive with dwarven industry, now seemed empty and lifeless, and the Fellowship set out through the frigid passages with growing unease. After 3 days they reached the chamber of Maiar, where they found Balin's tomb, only to be attacked by a host of orcs, resulting in a fierce battle. As they fled afterward, Gandalf attempted to seal the doors with a spell. From the other side he heard the shrieks of the enemy. He did not understand their harsh, guttural language, except for one word, Garsh, meaning fire. Then Gandalf sensed the presence of a powerful being before it appeared. The orcs fell silent, seized by terror. Something seized the iron ring of the door, and Gandalf felt a counterspell being cast. The force pressing upon the door was dreadful. The barrier began to give way, and Gandalf was forced to utter the commanding word. It was too much. A massive explosion followed, blasting the door into splinters. The walls cracked. Something black as smoke filled the chamber, swallowing the light. The blast hurled Gandalf backward as the tunnel collapsed behind him. The Fellowship fled and soon saw a red glow flickering across the walls ahead. They entered a vast hall, larger and more splendid than any they had seen before. In its floor was a great fissure from which a glaring red light poured, flames occasionally leaping from the depths. Eventually they reached the narrow, arched bridge of Khazad-dûm. Hundreds of orcs pursued them, and as Legolas raised his bow to fire, his hand faltered and the arrow dropped, his breath caught. A circle of emptiness opened around the orcs, as if they feared what approached. A massive shadowy shape drew near, humanoid, yet larger, more terrible. Fire coiled around it, smoke billowed, a manner of flame rose. In one hand glowed a fiery sword, in the other, blazing whips hissed through the air. Gimli whispered, covering his face, that it is Durin's Bane. Gandalf stood still, his features hardening as realization came over him. He understood now, it was a Balrog, a foe beyond his power, and he was already weary. The fiery shape charged toward them. Orcs screamed and fled across the stone causeways. Boromir raised his horn and blew. Its deep tone echoed through the caverns like the roar of many throats. For a moment the orcs hesitated, and the fiery shadow slowed. The Balrog advanced toward the bridge. Gandalf confronted it, leaning on his staff with his left hand and holding Glamdring in his right, shining with cold white light. The enemy halted before him, and the shadow around it stretched out like a pair of gigantic wings. It raised its whip, the thongs wailing and cracking, fire jetting from its nostrils. Gandalf stood firm. Gandalf declared that they could not pass. Silence fell over the hall. Even the orcs froze in place. He proclaimed that he was a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anna, and that the dark fire would not avail them, the flame of Udun. He commanded them to go back to the shadow, insisting once more that they could not pass. The Balrog did not speak. Its flames dimmed, but the darkness around it deepened. It stepped onto the bridge, then reared up in a towering height, its wings spreading from wall to wall. Gandalf seemed small and alone, like a bent tree in a storm. Suddenly the fiery sword flashed. Glamdring answered with a burst of white light. When their blades clashed, a sharp crack rang out and blinding lightning flared. The Balrog staggered. Its sword shattered into glowing fragments. Gandalf reeled but stood again. "You cannot pass," he repeated. The Balrog leapt forward, landing heavily on the bridge as its whips hissed like serpents. Gandalf lifted his staff, cried out a powerful word, and struck the stone before him. A terrible thunderous sound followed. The staff broke and fell from his hand. White fire blazed. The bridge quaked, and the stone beneath the Balrog split, crumbling into the abyss. The rest of the bridge remained, a broken ledge above the void. With a dreadful roar, the Balrog fell into the depths, and as it fell, its whip lashed upward, coiling around Gandalf's legs. He stumbled, his grip slipped from the stone, he disappeared into the chasm. They fell for a long time, plunging into icy waters deep below, cold as the tide of death, nearly stopping their hearts. Thus they reached the lowest foundations of Khazad-dûm, down to the roots of stone. The Balrog's flames were extinguished, but it transformed into a vile, serpentine creature gripping Gandalf with terrible strength. Their battle continued far beneath the earth in pitch-black deeps where time held no meaning. Gandalf struck again and again with Glamdring. At last the Balrog fled into the impenetrable passages not carved by dwarven hands. Gandalf pursued through the shadows, where nameless things older than Sauron stirred. He tracked the Balrog back into hidden ways under Khazad-dûm and up the winding tunnels until they reached the endless stair, long believed a myth or destroyed. The stair spiraled upward for thousands of steps, from the deepest caverns to the summit of Celebdil, ending in Durin's tower carved into the peak of Ziraxigil. At the top, through a solitary window overlooking the world lost in clouds below, the Balrog stepped out onto a narrow ledge and burst again into flame. There they fought, alone, with no witness. Those watching from afar thought the mountain was struck by storm and lightning, fire dancing across its slopes, the air thick with smoke, mist, and falling ice. At last Gandalf cast the Balrog down from the summit. It struck the mountainside and perished there. Thus ended the tale of Durin's Bane. In the depths of Tolkien's world of Arda, a long-standing debate rages among readers and scholars. Did Balrogs have actual wings, or were their wings merely metaphorical expressions of their shadows and terror? This question arises primarily from descriptions in the Fellowship of the Ring, in the chapter The Bridge of Khazad-dûm. There, the Balrog is described. Its enemy halted facing him, and the shadow about it reached out like two vast wings. This suggests the shadow surrounding the Balrog resembled wings, but does not clarify whether they were physical. The next sentence states, "Suddenly it drew itself up to a great height, and its wings were spread from wall to wall." This can be read as confirmation of actual wings spanning the hall. Other passages complicate the matter. In the Silmarillion, "Then swiftly they arose, and flew over Hithlum, and came to Lammoth like a tempest of fire." This might be metaphor, or a literal description of flight. Yet there are counter-arguments. In the tale of Glorfindel and the Balrog, and both fell to ruin in the abyss. If the Balrog had true wings, it might have saved itself. Similarly, Gandalf says of his own battle, "I threw down my enemy, and he fell from the high place and smote the mountainside in his ruin." Again, if it could fly, it should have avoided the fall. Christopher Tolkien notes that the concept of Balrogs evolved over time. Earlier versions portrayed them as more numerous and less powerful, whereas later writings made them rarer and more fearsome. Their changing nature may have influenced their depiction. Tolkien also frequently used metaphorical language, making interpretation difficult. In the end, there is no definitive answer. Some passages suggest physical wings, others contradict this. And that is all from us about the Balrog known as Durin's Bane. Would you like to hear more stories like this? Let us know in the comments.